This week is emotionally loud. People are going to start saying what they actually feel. This is not detached Gemini energy anymore. These are the time periods you'll want to avoid. Now let's get into the rising sign forecasts. This week, Mercury slips into Cancer to join Venus and Jupiter, and suddenly the atmosphere changes. The noise softens, the pace slows. After weeks of Gemini static, endless tabs open, notifications firing, conversations skimming the surface at lightning speed, the cosmos pulls everyone indoors, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. There's steam on the windows now, tea left steeping too long, family recipes, half-remembered dreams, midnight conversations in kitchens lit only by the fridge light. Cancer is a sign of care in its rawest form, nourishment, memory, protection, attachment, softness that actually means something. And with Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter all gathered here, this week feels unusually intimate, not performative intimacy, not curated vulnerability, but real closeness, the kind that asks you to exhale fully for the first time in weeks. Beneath the futuristic buzz of the Gemini sun and the ongoing social rewiring of Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius, there's a quieter undercurrent emerging, something that looks a lot like homesickness, a craving for emotional safety in a world moving too fast to metabolize properly. Mercury's move from Gemini into Cancer changes the very texture of thought. People are going to start saying what they actually feel. Information stops being abstract and starts becoming personal. Conversations drift toward childhood stories, old relationships, family dynamics, memories you thought you'd outgrown, revisited now with fresh emotional clarity, understanding not just what happened, but how it actually felt. Nostalgia hangs thick in the air this week, not always sad, but potent, like hearing a song you forgot existed and instantly becoming 17 again. As Mercury enters Cancer, it immediately opposes the Moon in Capricorn, and the result is a striking emotional contradiction. Capricorn Moon keeps its composure immaculate, polished shoes, tight schedules, feelings held together with a careful professionalism. Meanwhile, Mercury in Cancer wants honesty and tenderness. Conversations wobble between vulnerability and self-protection all week long, people confessing something deeply personal and then laughing it off a second later. Feelings surfacing awkwardly through otherwise practical exchanges. Logic and emotion translating each other imperfectly. At the same time, Mercury forms a trine to the North Node in Pisces, giving certain thoughts and conversations an eerie sense of significance. The right sentence lands at exactly the right moment. A passing comment stays with you for days. In Pisces, the North Node is pulling the collective towards compassion, surrender, imagination, and faith in what can't be neatly categorized or rationalized. And Mercury harmonizing with it from Cancer suggests that emotional intelligence is the sharpest tool available right now. Therapy sessions, journaling spirals, voice notes sent at 1 a.m., art pulled from personal memory. These are the spaces where something genuinely meaningful can crystallize this week. And then there's Venus and Jupiter amplifying everything. 3 planets in Cancer together creates an atmosphere that feels lush, cocooned, almost womb-like, with Jupiter turning the emotional register all the way up. This week is emotionally loud. Joy feels sweeter, affection feels warmer, tenderness lingers longer, but vulnerability also arrives with startling intensity, and old wounds may swell back to the surface, demanding acknowledgement. Jupiter in Cancer is one of astrology's most generous placements, deeply protective, emotionally abundant, capable of finding profound richness in ordinary moments. And with Venus here too, the week's magic lives in surprisingly simple places. A homemade meal eaten slowly, someone remembering a detail about you from months ago, fresh sheets, familiar neighborhoods, sitting beside someone in comfortable silence. Intimacy becomes restorative instead of draining. Care becomes sacred instead of transactional. The sharpest edge this week comes from Venus squaring the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. This is where softness meets reality. Saturn and Neptune together in Aries are reshaping identity itself, dissolving old fantasies while demanding a more honest, embodied version of selfhood emerge in their place. Venus in Cancer, meanwhile, wants reassurance, closeness, and emotional reciprocity. and the friction between these energies may expose where love feels conditional, where care feels uneven, or where a relationship no longer quite matches the person you're becoming. Loneliness can feel strangely loud this week, even in company. So can disappointment. But this aspect isn't about loving less deeply. It's about whether you can love without disappearing into it. Meanwhile, the Gemini sun alongside Uranus continues crackling in the background like an overstimulated nervous system. Information moves fast, attention spans fracture, and plans change suddenly. The future feels unstable and electrically alive. There's novelty everywhere, new technologies, new conversations, new possibilities arriving faster than anyone can fully process them. But against all that acceleration, Cancer's energy keeps whispering the same thing. Come home. Back to your body, back to your people, back to whatever steadies you. Mars in Taurus remains oddly isolated this week, operating outside the larger planetary storyline. Energy levels may feel strangely self-contained, steady, but not especially motivated by external momentum. For some, this creates a grounding rhythm, cooking elaborate meals, reorganizing spaces, gardening, swimming, stretching out slowly in the sun. For others, it can feel like effort without direction. Mars in Taurus doesn't care about speed right now. It wants texture, pleasure, patience, and anything it can tangibly hold in its hands. Overall, this is not a week for forcing clarity or racing toward the future. The small moments are the main moments. The world may still be spinning faster by the day, but these Cancer transits are a reminder that emotional nourishment isn't a distraction from life, it is life. Electional times. Before we move into the rising sign forecast, I want to talk briefly about electional astrology. Not every moment carries the same quality. Some windows are smooth, supportive, and forward-moving, while others feel more unstable or strangely difficult no matter how carefully you plan. And if you're launching something important this week, like signing a contract, posting announcements, having major conversations, booking travel, starting projects, or making purchases, these are the time periods you'll want to avoid. First, void of course moons. A void of course moon happens when the moon has finished making major aspects before entering the next sign. Astrologically, it creates a kind of drifting quality, like sending an email into the void and never hearing back. Things initiated under a void of course moon often fail to develop the way you expect, lose momentum halfway through, or simply dissolve into irrelevance later on. This is better used for low-stakes activities like errands, admin, cleaning, resting, reflecting, reorganizing your life, or tying up loose ends rather than beginning something new. So from June 1st through to the 7th, here are your void of course moon periods. Pause the video and convert these to your local time zone. Moon in Capricorn. If possible, you should also generally avoid starting anything major while the moon is in its detriment in Capricorn, especially since it will be squaring Saturn while it's there, which indicates that starting something at this time may lead to slow progress and blockages. Again, please pause the video and convert to your local time zone. Now let's get into the rising sign forecasts. Aries rising. There's a strange quietness settling over your life this week, Aries rising. The quiet may not be quite the right word for it. The outside world is still moving at the same breakneck speed. Phones buzzing on countertops, group chats multiplying, everyone speaking slightly too fast and listening only halfway. But somewhere underneath all of that static, something older and softer has started stirring. Mercury slips into Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 4th house, and suddenly the center of gravity shifts inward, toward home, toward memory, toward the versions of yourself that existed long before ambition got involved. This is the kind of week where you find yourself standing in the kitchen long after the kettle has boiled, staring absently out the window while rain gathers against the glass in uneven streaks, thinking about something your mother said 15 years ago that only now begins to make emotional sense. A week where someone in your family says something entirely ordinary over dinner and it lands with surprising weight anyway. There is a peculiar tenderness hanging over your chart right now, but it isn't sentimental. It feels more archaeological than nostalgic, less remembering the good old days and more brushing dust off emotional structures that have been quietly reshaping your life for years. And because the moon in Capricorn is opposing all of this from your 10th house, the tension becomes impossible to ignore. The emails still need answering, deadlines still exist. Somewhere, someone still expects professionalism from you, while part of you is busy remembering the smell of the laundry detergent your childhood home used. The contradiction is almost absurd at times, replying to work messages while emotionally spiraling over a family memory that resurfaced out of nowhere. Mercury in Cancer keeps trying to soften you, while Capricorn keeps tightening everything back into place before anybody notices. What's interesting is that the real movement this week doesn't happen externally at all. Mars in Taurus is sitting quietly in your 2nd house, steady and oddly self-contained, like someone slowly kneading bread dough while the rest of the world argues online. There's something deeply unbothered about it. Practical tasks become strangely grounding now, reorganizing a cupboard, buying groceries, folding clothes while a podcast hums softly in the background. The body seems to understand before the mind does that stability is being rebuilt through repetition, texture, and familiarity. Meanwhile, Venus squaring your Saturn in your 1st house brings a sharper edge underneath all of this softness. Old family roles have a way of reappearing when everyone gets back under one roof, even metaphorically. The confident one, the easygoing one, the emotional caretaker, the child who learned early how to make themselves smaller to keep the atmosphere manageable. Saturn in Aries has been teaching you something harsher and more adult about selfhood over the past months, and this week there's a quiet awareness of how certain versions of you no longer properly fit anymore, even if they still feel emotionally familiar. Still, there is genuine nourishment here, the kind that arrives indirectly, like someone remembering exactly how you take your tea, fresh sheets after an exhausting week, a conversation that begins with practicalities and somehow ends in confession. The world outside may still feel electrically overstimulated, but your chart keeps pulling towards smaller rooms, softer lighting, slower evenings, towards whatever allows your nervous system to unclench for 5 consecutive minutes. And honestly, that may be where the real abundance is hiding. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Taurus rising. Mercury entering Cancer this week does something surprisingly intimate to your world, Taurus rising. The pace of communication slows just enough for people to start meaning what they say again. Conversations stop skimming the surface and begin lingering in strange places instead. Outside cafes after closing time, in parked cars at midnight, halfway through voice notes sent while walking home under streetlights. Suddenly everyone is confessing things accidentally. Your 3rd house is glowing right now with Mercury joining Venus and Jupiter, and the effect is less of a busy social week and more emotional texture saturating the everyday. The corner store cashier remembers your usual order, and it almost moves you to tears for reasons you can't entirely explain. A sibling mentions something casually over lunch that quietly reframes your understanding of your entire childhood. Someone sends you a message with only one sentence in it, and you reread it 6 times throughout the day because it lodged somewhere deeper. There's also something beautiful happening around language itself now. Words feel heavier, warmer, more capable of carrying emotional truth without collapsing under it. Mercury and Gemini had everyone speaking in hyperlinks and punchlines for weeks, but Mercury in Cancer speaks differently. It circles around the point first, lets silence breathe between thoughts, and understands instinctively that the real meaning of a conversation often lives in what gets hesitated over rather than what gets said cleanly. This is excellent astrology for writers, teachers, interviewers, storytellers, or anyone trying to articulate something emotionally precise without flattening it into self-help jargon. At the same time, the opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 9th house creates an interesting split screen effect between your larger philosophies and your ordinary lived reality. Big ideas arrive sideways this week, through overheard conversations, through a passing comment from someone who doesn't realize they've just changed your perspective slightly. There's a sense that the universe keeps trying to sneak wisdom into your life disguised as small talk. And beneath all of this warmth sits Saturn in your 12th house, squared by Venus, adding a faint but persistent ache underneath otherwise lovely interactions. You may notice moments where a conversation almost reaches emotional honesty before someone abruptly changes the subject, or where a perfectly nice evening leaves behind an odd loneliness once everyone goes home. Saturn here operates like old emotional weather trapped behind walls, invisible but shaping everything subtly from underneath. The instinct may be to pressure yourself into clarity about what exactly feels unresolved, though this week works better through observation than interrogation. Meanwhile, Mars continues moving through your first house like a low electrical current running beneath the skin, steady, physical, and impossible to fully ignore. Even unaspected, Mars is still Mars. This week the body wants space, movement, immediate gratification. You may notice irritation surfacing faster than usual in situations where you feel slowed down, overlooked, or subtly controlled, particularly because Taurus prefers calm, right up until the moment it absolutely does not. Anger here rarely arrives dramatically at first. It accumulates quietly, like pressure building beneath a locked door. Conversations may become more blunt, patience shorter, desires harder to negotiate away for the comfort of other people. There's something undeniably sensual about this transit, but also territorial. The nervous system keeps asking a very simple question all week: what actually feels good for me, and why have I been pretending otherwise? Overall, the week feels full of conversations that start small and end somewhere unexpectedly tender. A neighbor leaning against your doorway, talking longer than usual. Rain tapping softly against tram windows while someone tells you the truth for the first time. Half-finished text rewritten 3 times. Life becoming more emotionally articulate, one ordinary exchange at a time. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Gemini rising. After weeks of your chart crackling with restless electricity, Gemini rising, this week feels like finally sitting down after standing too long at a crowded party. The noise recedes slightly. Your nervous system exhales. Mercury leaves your sign and slips into Cancer, joining Venus and Jupiter in your second house. And suddenly attention shifts towards slower, heavier, more tangible things. Money, food, comfort, self-worth. The deeply emotional question of what actually feels sustaining rather than merely stimulating. The atmosphere around you now feels thick with texture and materiality, strawberries eaten slowly over the sink, because they were expensive enough to deserve your full attention. Running your hands across fabrics while absent-mindedly wondering when exactly your definition of success became so disconnected from pleasure. Budget spreadsheets opened late at night, while old family beliefs about scarcity creep quietly into the room beside you. Mercury in Cancer has a way of revealing that financial conversations are almost never only financial conversations. And because Jupiter is here too, the emotional scale of all this becomes larger than expected. Questions around value expand outward rapidly. What your labor is worth, what your time is worth, whether the life you're building actually nourishes you or merely impresses other people from a distance. The Gemini Sun and Uranus still moving through your first house continue tempting you towards reinvention, towards movement, towards the next fascinating possibility arriving 5 seconds from now. But the second house stellium keeps slowing the camera down, insisting you actually feel the ground underneath yourself before sprinting towards the future again. The opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 8th house sharpens this even further. Themes of debt, obligation, emotional reciprocity, and shared resources begin surfacing subtly through everyday interactions. Who gives more than they receive? Who feels responsible for everyone? Which forms of support come with invisible strings attached? You may notice this appearing through practical situations like splitting bills, discussing money, negotiating responsibilities. And meanwhile, the emotional undercurrent beneath it says something much bigger. There's also a striking connection this week between your self-worth and your future direction. Mercury trining the North Node in your 10th house suggests that the conversations you're having privately with yourself about value are not separate from career momentum at all. They're the foundation underneath it. Sometimes the turning point arrives dramatically, but more often it arrives quietly, through the slow erosion of an old belief you didn't realize was governing your entire life. The moment you stop apologizing internally for wanting more. The moment you realize exhaustion has become mistaken for ambition. Meanwhile, Mars sits quietly in your 12th house like a sleeping animal, contributing to the sense that your energy reserves need protecting rather than maximizing right now. Restlessness may still flicker occasionally. Gemini energy rarely goes fully offline. But underneath it, there is genuine fatigue asking to be acknowledged properly instead of intellectualized away. This week feels less like acceleration and more like recalibration. Like standing in your kitchen at midnight eating toast in silence while reconsidering your entire relationship with enoughness. Like noticing how much calmer your body feels in freshly washed sheets than it ever does inside another productivity spiral. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Cancer rising. This is your week, Cancer rising, though not in the loud, performative way astrology sometimes promises these things. There are no fireworks here, no dramatic reinvention montage. Instead, Mercury enters your sign and joins Venus and Jupiter already gathered in your first house, and the effect is subtler, stranger, and infinitely more intimate. It feels like returning to yourself after months of speaking a language that was never fully yours. You may notice it first in small ways, the ease with which words arrive suddenly, the way people lean in more carefully when you speak, the odd sensation of hearing yourself tell the truth in real time instead of editing it into something more manageable, more polished, more convenient for everyone else. Mercury in your sign sharpens emotional precision enormously this week. Thoughts no longer hover vaguely at the edge of feeling, they land fully inside it. And because Venus and Jupiter are amplifying everything, your presence itself becomes unusually magnetic now. This feels less like trying to attract attention and more like finally inhabiting yourself completely enough that other people instinctively relax around you. Someone tells you something deeply personal within 10 minutes of meeting you. A friend watches your face while speaking as though your reaction matters enormously. Rooms subtly rearrange themselves around your emotional atmosphere. There is a lushness to this week that borders on cinematic at times. Hair still damp after a shower while soft music plays from another room. Late night conversations under dim kitchen lighting. Someone brushing crumbs off your sleeve with absent tenderness. The ordinary becomes emotionally saturated under this much Cancer energy. Even familiar neighborhoods begin carrying the glow of memory around their edges. But the opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 7th house prevents this week from drifting entirely into softness. Relationships become mirrors now, and not always comfortable ones. A partner, friend, or significant person reflects something back to you with startling clarity this week, possibly without even meaning to. There may be moments when vulnerability appears suddenly in otherwise practical conversations, where someone says something emotionally exposing and immediately laughs afterwards as though trying to reel it back in. Venus squaring Saturn in your 10th house also adds tension between personal authenticity and professional composure. Somewhere in your public life, there is still pressure to appear more polished, more efficient, less emotional than you actually are. Saturn keeps asking difficult questions about authority, visibility, ambition. Meanwhile, Venus in your 1st house keeps softening your edges despite yourself. The result is an interesting contradiction, becoming more emotionally honest at the exact same moment your external responsibilities demand greater structure. Still, the abundance here is real. Jupiter in Cancer rarely operates through spectacle. It expands life through emotional richness, through meaningful closeness, through suddenly recognizing that nourishment is not a luxury, but a biological necessity. This week understands the sacredness of simple things. Fresh laundry, shared meals, sitting beside someone in comfortable silence while rain taps softly against the windows. The kind of care that asks for nothing dramatic in return except presence. And perhaps that's the real shift taking place now. The growing awareness that softness is not the opposite of strength after all. Sometimes it's the thing holding the entire architecture together quietly from underneath. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Leo rising. There's a strong possibility, Leo rising, that the world will mistake your distance this week for disinterest, when in reality you're simply somewhere much deeper than usual. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 12th house, drawing your attention away from the loudness of the external world and toward the quieter, stranger terrain underneath it. Dreams, memory, exhaustion, intuition, the emotional residue left behind after months of overstimulation. Your social life may still technically exist. Messages continue arriving, invitations continue appearing, but somewhere internally the lights have dimmed. This is the kind of astrology that turns ordinary moments faintly cinematic. Falling asleep on the couch at dusk while rain rattles softly against the windows. Waking from a dream so vivid it takes several minutes to remember what year it is. Standing under hot water longer than necessary because your nervous system refuses to unclench anywhere else. Mercury in the 12th house rarely communicates directly. It prefers symbols and moods. And because Venus and Jupiter are here too, there is genuine richness available inside this retreat, though it requires resisting the temptation to keep yourself busy enough to avoid hearing your own inner voice clearly. The past few weeks have likely felt socially electric. The Gemini Sun and Uranus still crackling through your 11th house keep everyone overstimulated, hyperconnected, slightly sleep deprived. But beneath all that noise, your chart has been quietly pulling towards solitude, towards stillness, towards whatever happens emotionally when nobody else is watching. You may notice your body becoming the messenger this week. The opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 6th house creates a direct line between your emotional undercurrents and your physical routines, which means fatigue carries information now. So do headaches, strange dreams, sudden waves of heaviness arriving for no obvious reason. The body keeps interrupting the schedule with messages the mind would rather postpone reading. Meanwhile, Mercury trining the North Node in your 8th house gives certain memories and intuitions unusual psychological weight. A passing thought refuses to leave. A dream reopens a conversation you thought had ended years ago. Someone says something casually that illuminates a dynamic you've been circling around without naming properly. There's a feeling this week that the unconscious mind is trying very hard to get your attention, though not necessarily through methods that are neat or linear. Venus squaring Saturn in your 9th house also introduces a subtle disillusionment around certain beliefs or future visions. Something once held romantically or idealistically may begin hardening into reality now, and reality is not always as poetic as fantasy. A trip, a plan, an ideology, even a version of your future self, all of it is being asked to withstand contact with practical life. Saturn in Aries has very little interest in escapism. Still, there's beauty everywhere in this chart if you stop looking for it exclusively in productivity, visibility, or momentum. It lives in half-lit rooms, in uninterrupted sleep, in private notebooks filled with thoughts too unfinished to explain out loud yet, in the peculiar relief of cancelling plans and immediately feeling your shoulders drop 2 inches lower. This week does not ask to be maximized. It asks to be listened to carefully, almost the way one listens for footsteps in another room late at night. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Virgo rising. Your social life takes on an unexpectedly emotional quality this week, though social life may undersell what is actually happening. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 11th house, and suddenly friendships stop functioning as logistical arrangements or background infrastructure and begin feeling vivid, nourishing, and intimate. The group chat turns confessional at midnight. Someone stays behind after dinner and the real conversation begins only once everyone else has gone home. A friend remembers a tiny detail you mentioned months ago and it affects you more than you care to admit. There is something deeply human about your chart right now. Not polished, not performative, human in the messy, affectionate sense. The kind where people sit cross-legged on kitchen floors eating cut fruit out of mixing bowls while discussing breakups, career fears, whether anyone actually feels like a real adult yet. Cancer energy has very little interest in networking. It wants belonging. And with 3 planets gathered in your 11th house, belonging becomes one of the central emotional themes of the week. You may notice yourself softening socially in ways that feel slightly unfamiliar. Virgo placements often approach relationships through usefulness first, showing care through competence, through remembering practical details, through quietly fixing things before anyone notices they're broken. But this week operates through warmth rather than optimization. People are responding less to what you can do for them and more to the emotional atmosphere you create around them, which frankly may feel both beautiful and mildly unnerving. The opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 5th house creates an interesting creative tension underneath all of this communal softness. Part of you wants to contribute to something larger than yourself, while another part wants to protect your own individual voice carefully from dilution. You may feel this most strongly around creative projects, collaborations, or group dynamics where your personal vision doesn't slot perfectly into collective expectations. Still, the friction itself seems productive somehow, like a match striking against a rough stone. And then there's a deeper undercurrent running beneath the week, Venus squaring Saturn in your 8th house. Not every connection feels entirely uncomplicated right now. Beneath otherwise warm social interactions, questions around trust, reciprocity, emotional honesty, and unspoken power dynamics continue quietly humming in the background. Someone may disappoint you slightly without intending to. A group dynamic could reveal subtle fault lines once everyone relaxes enough to stop performing harmony. Saturn in the 8th house tends to remove illusions slowly and methodically, often through tiny movements that reveal more than dramatic betrayals ever could. Still, there's extraordinary nourishment available in your chart now if you allow yourself to receive it without immediately converting it into responsibility. Mercury trining the North Node in your 7th house suggests that conversations happening within friendships and communities are directly reshaping your closest relationships too. The emotional honesty available in group spaces this week ripples outwards into every other part of your relational life. There's something lovely about the atmosphere surrounding you right now. Warm lamps, shared playlists, half-empty wine glasses forgotten on coffee tables while everyone talks for hours longer than planned. The recognition that intimacy does not always arrive through grand declarations. Sometimes it arrives through somebody handing you a blanket without interrupting your sentence. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Libra rising. The career story unfolding for you this week, Libra rising, feels unusually personal. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter at the very top of your chart, saturating your 10th house with warmth, visibility, and emotional intelligence. And suddenly professional life stops feeling purely strategic and starts feeling strangely intimate. People are responding not only to your competence now, but to your humanity. The carefully maintained separation between public image and private feeling begins dissolving around the edges. This is excellent astrology for being seen properly, not in the hollow algorithmic sense of attention, but being recognized. Someone important remembers your name after one meeting. A conversation with a boss or collaborator unexpectedly drifts into genuine emotional honesty. Your ability to read a room, soften tension, phrase things diplomatically without sounding insincere becomes an enormous professional asset now, particularly because so much of the wider atmosphere still feels overstimulated and emotionally detached. And there's something undeniably elegant about the way this energy moves through your chart. Mercury in Cancer communicates with emotional precision rather than corporate polish. Venus adds charm and aesthetic instinct. Jupiter enlarges everything it touches. The result is a public presence that feels less manufactured and more magnetic. You may notice this showing up subtly. People lingering after meetings to keep talking to you, invitations arriving more easily, professional conversations drifting towards personal territory almost accidentally. Still, the Capricorn Moon opposing this stellium from your 4th house keeps tugging your attention back towards home, towards private emotional realities that refuse to stay neatly compartmentalized while your public life accelerates. The tension becomes particularly visible in transitional spaces, answering work emails from bed, carrying takeaway soup home after a networking event, standing in your kitchen still dressed for the office while emotionally processing a conversation that technically happened hours ago. Somewhere underneath all the ambition, homesickness lingers heavily this week, not necessarily for a place, sometimes for a feeling. And because Venus, your ruler, is squaring Saturn in your 7th house, relationships add another layer of complexity to the story. Someone close to you may feel cooler, harder to reach, less emotionally available than you would prefer. Saturn in Aries tends to strip interactions down to their structural truth, which means any imbalance within partnerships becomes more difficult to smooth over gracefully now. Libra energy usually instinctively moves towards harmony, but this week keeps exposing the emotional cost of maintaining peace by abandoning your own center. Meanwhile, Mars continues moving through your 8th house, and here it's less like an explosion and more like a slow-burning fuse disappearing into darkness. The emotional atmosphere around intimacy, shared finances, jealousy, trust, and power dynamics feels heavier than people are openly acknowledging. Someone may become unexpectedly possessive. A financial conversation acquires emotional undertones neither person fully admits to. Attraction sharpens into obsession around the edges. Even small interactions can carry an outsized psychological charge now, because Mars in the 8th house does not particularly care for superficiality. It wants leverage, honesty, depth, and control. In Taurus, the conflict tends to move slowly and silently at first, surfacing through stubbornness, withdrawal, simmering resentment, or an unwillingness to bend once a boundary has been reached. This week's softer Cancer energy wraps everything in tenderness, but underneath it all, Mars keeps exposing where attachment and ownership are quietly bleeding into one another. The larger atmosphere surrounding your chart feels deeply cinematic this week. Late evenings at the office with only desk lamps left on, fresh flowers beside laptops, someone fixing your collar absent-mindedly before an important event. Success arriving wrapped in tenderness rather than adrenaline. The opportunities themselves appear real and substantial, but the deepest story may actually be about discovering how much more sustainable ambition becomes once emotional nourishment is allowed into the architecture alongside it. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Scorpio rising. Your world expands this week, Scorpio rising, though perhaps not in the loud, dramatic way expansion is usually advertised. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 9th house, and suddenly attention stretches outwards towards bigger ideas, larger meanings, distant places, conversations that leave your mind humming for hours afterwards. Something inside you seems hungry again, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, after a long period of psychological heaviness and emotional excavation. This is the kind of astrology that makes ordinary life feel briefly cinematic. Reading a book at 1 a.m. and underlying entire paragraphs because they articulate something you've felt for years but never managed to name properly. Sitting on a balcony after dinner while someone explains a philosophy that quietly rearranges your worldview. Becoming irrationally emotional over a line from a film because it lands too close to the truth. Cancer energy softens the usually abstract territory of the 9th house. Ideas are no longer purely intellectual now, they become personal. And because Jupiter is involved, there is genuine wonder available here. The world begins feeling larger again, in a way that matters. More textured, more alive. You may feel pulled towards travel, study, spiritual exploration, long-form conversations, foreign films, strange theories, old religions, ocean imagery, books that smell faintly like dust and sea salt. Even everyday interactions carry a sense that meaning is trying to arrive through them if you pay close enough attention. What's especially interesting is that your usual Scorpio instinct towards suspicion softens slightly under this weather. The chart feels less investigative than receptive, less prove it and more tell me more. There's a warmth entering your thinking now that allows ideas to unfold gradually rather than demanding immediate certainty from them. Mercury in Cancer understands that truth often arrives emotionally before it arrives logically. Still, the opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your third house complicates communication somewhat. You may find that the larger, more nuanced truths unfolding internally are difficult to translate cleanly into ordinary conversation. Someone asks a casual question and suddenly you're trying to decompress an existential revelation into two coherent sentences while standing beside the coffee machine at work. There can be a strange loneliness this week in realizing how much bigger your internal world feels compared to the language available to explain it. Venus squaring Saturn in your 6th house also introduces friction between these expansive philosophical currents and the practical demands of ordinary life. Laundry still needs folding, emails still require replies. The body still needs feeding and sleeping, regardless of how spiritually significant your latest existential insight feels. Saturn keeps dragging the focus back towards responsibilities, routines, and physical maintenance. And honestly, that tension may be useful. Otherwise, you could drift beautifully into abstraction without ever grounding any of it into lived reality. Meanwhile, Mars moving through your 7th house continues to color relationships with a sharper edge than the rest of the chart might initially suggest. Even though the larger atmosphere is soft, philosophical, almost dreamy at times, partnership dynamics carry an undercurrent of tension this week, not necessarily explosive conflict, but the slow friction that emerges when two people want different things and neither is especially willing to yield. In Taurus, Mars fights through resistance rather than attack. The conflict lives in silence, stubbornness, delayed responses, subtle tests of loyalty, the strange emotional gravity of somebody refusing to move first. Existing frustrations within relationships can become unusually tangible now, particularly around consistency, reliability, affection, or physical presence. And because Mars rules your chart, you're likely feeling this transit in the body as much as emotionally. The jaw tightening during conversations, the sudden exhaustion after holding back irritation too long, the awareness that peace and repression are not always the same thing. Overall, the week carries the atmosphere of a train journey at dusk, landscape shifting outside the window while your reflection floats faintly over the glass. The sense that your life is widening somehow, even if you can't fully articulate into what yet. Sometimes growth announces itself dramatically, other times it arrives quietly, through one conversation, one idea, one sentence that follows you home and refuses to leave. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Sagittarius rising. Last week's full moon in your sign likely felt clarifying in the way lightning briefly illuminates an entire landscape at once. Sudden visibility, sudden honesty, the uncomfortable recognition of something that could no longer remain vague. This week, however, the atmosphere shifts underground. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 8th house, drawing your attention towards the emotional and psychological terrain most people spend their lives carefully avoiding. Debt, grief, dependence, desire, shared resources, and the quiet negotiations of power that exist beneath even the gentlest relationships. The mood here is dense, slow-moving, saltwater heavy. Conversations drift towards subjects that would usually remain politely untouched. Someone mentions money and the emotional temperature in the room changes instantly. A casual question suddenly reveals an entire undercurrent inside a relationship that neither person has fully articulated before. Mercury in the 8th house does not skim surfaces, it lifts floorboards. And because Venus and Jupiter are already here, there's something strangely beautiful about the depth itself. The intimacy available this week carries real emotional gravity, the kind that alters people slightly after experiencing it. Sitting awake beside someone at 2 a.m. discussing childhood fears neither of you expected to confess. Opening a banking app together and realizing finances carry far more emotional symbolism than practical meaning. Discovering how vulnerable trust actually is once it stops existing as an abstract concept and becomes something tangible enough to lose. The opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 2nd house sharpens the tension between what is shared and what remains yours alone. Emotional self-protection becomes visible in small, almost mundane ways this week, hesitating before answering honestly, mentally calculating what vulnerability might cost before offering it, suddenly becoming territorial over time, money, energy, affection. Capricorn's instinct is always towards self-sufficiency, while the 8th house insists that real intimacy eventually requires surrendering the illusion of complete independence. The conversation between these two instincts feels particularly alive now. Meanwhile, Mercury trining the North Node in your 4th house suggests that whatever surfaces through these deeper emotional exchanges echoes backward into family history, memory, and the emotional architecture built long before adulthood began. Some of the week's revelations may have surprisingly old roots. A reaction that initially seems irrational suddenly makes perfect sense once traced back far enough. The past keeps quietly threading itself through present intimacy like stitching beneath fabric. Venus squaring Saturn in your 5th house also introduces a certain heaviness around pleasure, romance, and self-expression. Joy may feel oddly conditional this week, as though some internal voice keeps insisting you earn rest before receiving it. Romantic situations can carry undertones of caution or emotional withholding, particularly where vulnerability and pride intersect. Saturn in Aries has little patience for emotional performance. It wants honesty stripped of decoration. And then there's Mars in Taurus moving through your 6th house, keeping a steady pressure running beneath the entire week through work, routine, and the body itself. Irritation accumulates physically now. Deadlines feel heavier. Small inefficiencies become disproportionately aggravating. The body may begin protesting quietly against schedules or obligations that have been sustainable in theory, but draining in practice. Mars here tends to produce a particular kind of resentment, the slow-building fury of feeling useful before feeling human. Even seemingly minor disruptions in routine can trigger outsized frustration because Taurus prefers predictability right up until pressure reaches breaking point. Still, there is something undeniably transformative about this week if you're willing to remain present for it. The 8th house rarely offers clean emotional experiences. What it offers instead is truth, intimate, inconvenient, psychologically revealing truth. And somewhere beneath all the discomfort, something inside you seems ready to become more honest than it has been in a very long time. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Capricorn rising. Relationships become impossible to experience casually this week, Capricorn rising. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 7th house, saturating the partnership sector of your chart with emotion, tenderness, memory, longing, projection, all the things your sign usually prefers to approach slowly with structural integrity firmly intact. But Cancer energy does not particularly care for emotional distance. It wants closeness, recognition, presence, the feeling of being genuinely met by another person rather than simply coordinated with. And suddenly, every interaction feels more personal than usual. A conversation over breakfast stretches unexpectedly into discussions about the future. Someone remembers a detail about your childhood you only mentioned once months ago. A passing comment from a partner lands with strange emotional precision and stays with you all day, resurfacing while folding laundry or standing in line for coffee. Mercury in the 7th house has a way of making relationships feel like mirrors with excellent lighting, revealing, intimate, and occasionally difficult to look away from. Because Venus and Jupiter are involved too, there is genuine warmth available here. Existing relationships soften around the edges. Now people arrive carrying a sense of emotional familiarity that feels almost suspiciously immediate. Even practical conversations seem wrapped in unusual tenderness this week. The atmosphere surrounding your one-on-one connections feels rich, lush, and deeply human, and less transactional and less defended. Still, the moon moving through your own sign directly opposite this stellium complicates matters considerably. Capricorn moons tend to maintain composure almost professionally, even while feeling enormous things internally, and this opposition creates the sensation of standing very still while someone else attempts to reach emotional truths you have not fully decided whether to reveal yet. You may notice yourself oscillating between startling vulnerability and immediate self-containment afterwards, as though instinctively trying to reseal emotional openings the moment they appear. The larger tension underneath the week may actually involve family history more than present relationships alone. Venus squaring Saturn in your 4th house suggests that something old, whether inherited emotional patterns, domestic tension, early conditioning around love or safety, these things quietly shape the way intimacy unfolds now. You may become unusually aware of the difference between the love you learned and the love you actually want. Saturn's work is rarely dramatic at first. It reveals itself through repetition, through noticing the same emotional reflex appear in different rooms with different people over and over again. Mercury trining the North Node in your 3rd house gives conversations unusual significance this week too. Words matter enormously now. Tone matters, timing matters. The exact phrasing of something said casually on a Tuesday evening may continue echoing through your mind days later. Emotional intelligence becomes far more consequential than intellectual correctness. Meanwhile, Mars in Taurus moves through your 5th house like a slow-burning appetite refusing to remain fully polite. Romantic tension thickens. Attraction sharpens into possessiveness around the edges. Creative frustration may also surface if something meaningful feels blocked, delayed, or insufficiently acknowledged. Mars here craves pleasure, touch, validation, creative release, but Taurus pursues these desires slowly, stubbornly, and sometimes indirectly. The result can feel like simmering emotional heat with nowhere obvious to go. Jealousy, irritation, competitiveness, frustration, all of it tends to accumulate quietly beneath otherwise calm surfaces this week. The overall atmosphere of your chart feels intensely intimate now. Candlelight reflected in wine glasses, long pauses during conversations that somehow say more than the sentences themselves. The awareness that closeness is never entirely comfortable because being truly seen inevitably rearranges something inside you. And yet, despite every instinct towards self-protection, part of you appears ready for exactly that. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Aquarius rising. There's something very tender about your life this week, Aquarius rising, though tenderness is not always the emotional register your sign reaches for first. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your 6th house, bringing warmth, emotional attentiveness, and unusual sensitivity into the ordinary architecture of daily life. Work, routines, health, schedules, domestic tasks, and the tiny repetitive actions that quietly become a life over time. And suddenly, the smallest moments carry emotional weight. The coffee made exactly the way you like it before a difficult morning. Someone checking whether you ate lunch. Reorganizing a chaotic desk late at night while listening to music that reminds you of another version of yourself entirely. The 6th house is rarely glamorous astrology, but under Cancer's influence it becomes deeply human. There's care embedded everywhere now if you look closely enough for it. You may also notice your relationship with productivity shifting subtly. Mercury in Cancer thinks intuitively rather than mechanically, which means your body keeps interrupting systems that technically function but emotionally exhaust you. The schedule you built 6 months ago no longer fits properly. Certain obligations feel heavier than they used to. Even your workspace may begin reflecting your emotional state more visibly. Clutter gathering during emotional overwhelm, fresh flowers appearing beside laptops, meals eaten slowly instead of absent-mindedly over keyboards. And because Venus and Jupiter are here too, there is genuine nourishment available in slowing down enough to experience your days rather than merely surviving them efficiently. The atmosphere of the week feels softer somehow, more textured, like laundry drying near open windows, stretching sore muscles in morning light, walking home carrying groceries while the air smells faintly like rain and takeaway noodles from the restaurant downstairs. Ordinary life becomes strangely cinematic under this kind of astrology. Still, the opposition from the Capricorn Moon in your 12th house creates a quieter emotional undercurrent running beneath the surface. Fatigue may arrive carrying emotional information now rather than purely physical depletion. Old feelings surface unexpectedly during mundane tasks. The unconscious mind keeps leaking gently into the daily routine through dreams, body sensations, memory fragments, unexplained heaviness. Something in your internal world appears to be asking for acknowledgement before it calcifies into burnout. Venus squaring Saturn in your third house also sharpens communication slightly around the edges. Small misunderstandings can feel disproportionately cold. A sibling, colleague, neighbor, or friend may seem more distant, critical, or emotionally unavailable than expected. Saturn in Aries tends to strip conversations down to essentials, removing social cushioning in ways that can initially feel harsher than intended. And because so much of the rest of your chart is operating through emotional sensitivity now, even ordinary friction can linger longer than usual. Meanwhile, Mars continues moving through Taurus in your fourth house, creating a slow-building pressure inside the domestic sphere itself. Tension at home may simmer quietly rather than erupt directly. Passive-aggressive silences, territorial behavior, irritation over shared spaces, unresolved family frustrations resurfacing through seemingly minor incidents. Even if nobody openly argues, the emotional atmosphere can feel unusually dense at times, particularly because Taurus resists change until resistance becomes exhausting. You may also feel a stronger instinct towards protecting your privacy now, becoming unexpectedly defensive whenever personal boundaries feel intruded upon. The larger story unfolding in your chart feels deceptively simple but deeply important. Pluto in your first house continues remaking your identity from the ground up, and this week asks how that transformation actually lives in the body, the routine, the hour-by-hour structure of ordinary existence. Reinvention sounds glamorous in theory. In practice, it often begins with changing how you spend a Tuesday afternoon. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds. Pisces rising. This week arrives wrapped in softness for you, Pisces rising, the kind that initially seems gentle before revealing how profoundly life-changing it actually is. Mercury enters Cancer and joins Venus and Jupiter in your fifth house, flooding your chart with creativity, romance, emotional honesty, pleasure, longing, beauty, and the peculiar ache that accompanies allowing yourself to genuinely enjoy being alive again. Everything feels more vivid now. Music sounds better, colors seem richer, conversations become strangely cinematic. Someone brushes your hand absent-mindedly and your entire nervous system notices. The fifth house governs joy, but under Cancer's influence, joy becomes deeply emotional rather than performative. This is not shallow entertainment or distraction. It is nourishment, the kind that reaches parts of you that have quietly gone hungry. You may find yourself returning instinctively towards creative expression this week, though perhaps less through ambition than emotional necessity. Writing paragraphs at midnight you never intended anyone to read, rearranging flowers in a vase 3 different times because the atmosphere matters more than efficiency, falling briefly, dramatically in love with songs, films, strangers, memories, even old versions of yourself. Mercury here gives language to feeling. Venus beautifies it. Jupiter enlarges it until even ordinary pleasures feel mythic around the edges. And because the North Node sits in your first house right now, Mercury's trine to it makes this week unusually significant on a personal level. What you create, express, confess, desire, and enjoy, all of it seems directly connected to the larger unfolding of who you're becoming. There's a sense that selfhood itself is trying to emerge more fully through joy rather than through suffering for once, which may feel almost suspiciously unfamiliar. Still, the Capricorn Moon opposing the stellium from your 11th house complicates the story slightly. The tension between authentic self-expression and social expectation becomes difficult to ignore. You may feel hyper-aware of audience perception now, whether your friends approve, whether your work will be understood properly, whether revealing too much of yourself risks subtle rejection from the wider collective around you. Capricorn energy remains cautious even while the 5th house wants emotional openness. And then there's Venus squaring Saturn in your second house, introducing material reality into an otherwise dreamy emotional atmosphere. Financial constraints may temper certain pleasures. A creative project raises uncomfortable questions around worth, value, sustainability. There can also be a quieter emotional friction underneath the week, the old belief that joy must somehow be earned before it's allowed. Saturn in Aries keeps interrogating what you truly believe you deserve. Meanwhile, Mars moving through Taurus in your third house sharpens language and communication more than you may initially realize. Conversations carry bite now. Irritation can surface unexpectedly through tone, text messages, interruptions, maybe misunderstandings with siblings, neighbors, or people encountered in everyday environments. Mars here tends to weaponize stubbornness subtly. Arguments that go in circles because nobody wants to yield first. Tension building through repeated small annoyances rather than one dramatic event. Mentally, the pace can feel relentless too, thoughts looping aggressively around unresolved frustrations until they finally find release through writing, speaking, or confrontation. Still, the larger atmosphere surrounding your chart feels lush in a way that can't be ignored. Open windows at night, paint water clouding softly in a glass jar, candle wax melting unevenly onto old plates. The sense that beauty itself might be trying to communicate something important to you this week if you stop treating it like decoration and start treating it like information instead. Your rising sign is only one piece of the story. If you want to understand how this is impacting your whole chart, you can book a personalized reading below and subscribe to follow the astrology of each week as it unfolds.